Council will call the meeting to order. For the record, it is 4:30 on September 7th, 2021. We'll begin this afternoon's work session with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Borton.
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Perot. Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Councilman Burnt. Mayor Simison.
Here. Next item up is the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
very pleased to make a motion to adopt the agenda as published.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. Next item up is the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
it's a great day when I have the privilege to make a motion to approve the consent agenda for the mayor to sign and for the clerk to attest.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is adopted. There were no items moved from the consent agenda, so we'll move on to Department Commissioner reports. First up is a public hearing for the adoption of proposed Republic Services solid waste fees. And I don't know who's going to be presenting.
Mr. Mayor, did you say it was Republican solid waste?
I may have done that.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Rodney Rimling, Business Finance Manager for Republic Services, Boise, Idaho, 11101 West Executive Drive. And I believe you have a memo in your packet from last week talking about the rates that we're proposing for this year. And it's a little bit different than previous years because we've had unprecedented labor increases. It's been building for a while, but over the course of the last year, we had to increase our wages by roughly 12.5%, which exceeds the CPI for garbage trash, which is running 4.34%. So we, to the best of our estimate, because we don't have a labor component of that index, it's about 8.5% outside of that index that we've had to increase wages. But going back to the regular increase, so annually the rates are increased October 1 of each year, and it's based on a CPI. This year, the CPI is garbage trash. It was changed last year. It's based on May, and the change in CPI was 4.34%. 90% of that is allowed, and which brings it down to 3.91%. And there are many components of the rate. Not all components of the rate are increased. Disposal is not increased, and then there's some other components that we'll call out. Household hazardous waste is a component of the rate that's not increased. It is it's 18 cents per household per month, and that's used to cover the household hazardous waste collection that's done over to Meridian Transfer Station. We reconcile that annually, and currently we are uncollected. Republic Services has not collected about $8,000. The number there, $7,964. So that rate doesn't quite cover the cost, but increases in households over the next year will probably reverse that. So we'll continue to hold that and leave that flat at 18 cents. The recycling processing charge is on residential and commercial materials. And for residential, it is $1.03 per household per month, where it has been for the last year. Again, we're not asking for a change there, so it's staying flat. You may have heard that commodity markets are improving a little bit, and so rates or the commodity amount that we're receiving is going up. However, we're also seeing increase in costs. In addition to that, Republic Services has about $132,000 in uncollected or uncollected costs, if you will, that this was designed to cover. And so we're leaving that flat, asking for no increase or decrease at this time. Recycling process fee that we pay our processor has gone up to $12.59 per household per month, and that coincides with a rate increase for October 1. So on the labor, the whole country is experiencing unprecedented labor shortages. In Meridian City, these shortages are resulting in increases of about 12.5% to about 8% over increases in CPI. Republic Services increased labor about $2 per hour, starting and existing drivers. And then we're asking for 11 cents per household per month on the residential side. Again, we mentioned disposal is not increased. Volumetric excise tax credit, or the fuel tax incentive that the federal government has provided or returned to users of alternative fuels over the last several years. This year for Meridian City, that amount was $54,427. Public Works has asked us to roll that into the rate, and like we did in the previous year. And the change from last year, from the previous year to this year, is an increase of about 3 cents per household per month. And what that means is that the credit went down just slightly from year to year. That's due primarily to the fact of just routes and fuel usage. So we calculate specifically on how much fuel is used in the contract for Meridian City. So again, that's $54,427 divided by your customers per month. So for all the residential impact, the components are in that last paragraph. The CPI is 79 cents. And of that 79 cents, the city of Meridian keeps a nickel of that, or 6%. 65 cents is CPI, household hazardous waste, again, 0, uncontrollable recycling commodity, unchanged, 0, disposal charge, 0, and volumetric excise tax was 3 cents. And then labor, we're asking for 11 cents. In the last page of your packet, you can see kind of a breakdown of the residential rate. The CPI increasing there $304,000 or 3.91% is allowed by the contract. And then the alternative fuel tax credit, or VTAC, is a reduction of $54,000 or 0.7%. And then the labor market adjustment that we're asking for is $52,489 or 0.67%. So to kind of put the whole labor thing in perspective, for the Meridian City contract, our labor increased about $214,000 to service this contract alone. So the 12.5% represents $214,000. And we're asking for residential households to cover $52,489. And that is 214, and then residential are 52,489. And the residential component of that's 39% of the actual residential labor. So we've got Republic Services keeping 61, and then we're asking residents to pick up 39%. In the other two lines of businesses, in commercial and industrial, we're asking for about 1% on those. So about $45,000 in commercial and $35,000 in industrial. So about a 1% increase up in is due to labor in each of those. Any questions?
Thank you, Rodney. Council, any questions?
Sure.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Rodney, what's the proposed labor increase for the city of Boise, city of Caldwell, city of Nampa, and city of Eagle?
So we have asked, or we are asking each of those cities as we go into those cities when it's due for the price increase. So we've calculated the rate, we've calculated the usage of that labor by all of our contracts. And we'll be taking that amount up with each of those contracts as those come up. So Boise is a larger percentage of our market, and thus have a larger piece of that, which Boise will incorporate into the rate structure, which is very different from the Meridian structure. But I didn't bring a dollar amount or discuss individual city rates with the city of Meridian. Those amounts, when we go to those cities, will be public record, just like this one is here.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
ballpark numbers for those? I recognize that it's going before them, but just like you've proposed a number to us, I'm just curious what you've proposed to those four other cities.
So why don't I give you a global number for what we've got in the market? Would that help you?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Rodney, I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm not looking for a global number. I'm looking for a local number. I'm looking to see how the city of Meridian ratepayers are going to compare to the four municipalities that you also serve that kind of touch our borders.
Yeah. So
And if you don't have that right now, that's okay. I'm not looking for a specific amount. Again, just a ballpark would be, is it 10 cents? Is it a quarter? Is it $1?
yeah. So when I say globally, I don't mean our bigger countrywide market. I mean right here in the valley. We're increasing our labor rates just about $1.6 million. So we're going up 1.6 million, and 214 of that relates to Meridian City. Roughly 3 times that would be the Boise City amount. So 600,
Okay.
600
Fair enough.
about.
It's what you'll have to come up if you are wanting to address that specific question.
I get what Rodney's saying because we work on this stuff together, but I think what you're looking for is we did go to Nampa already and they gave us a flat 4% increase. Instead of getting more specific here, like we worked with your public works and utility billing and we broke it down by service level very granularly, the labor piece. And in Nampa, it was a flat 4% across the board for the CPI, which included labor. So it was a little bit more than here. They're roughly the same size community. And so I'd have to go back and look, but that kind of gives you an idea. We did go to them with the same ask and they said yes. And that's the way they chose to handle it. We asked for a flat 4%, keep it simple. And in Boise, we take our expenses back to them. It's a contract where they look at our expenses and they give us a margin on it. So that piece is now, like Rodney said, we have that amount and we go to them and that becomes part of our negotiation as part of our expenses that they'll give us, they'll reimburse us on. So it's a little bit different formula, but the other 2 communities that border Meridian will also be asking them the same. I don't know if that helped at all. Okay.
Council, any additional questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burt.
thanks for your presentation. I appreciate it. I just had one question. How did you get to the split between your expenses? We're at 39 and you're at 61. How did you get to that number, those numbers?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's really an attempt to keep the rates as low as we can for Meridian residents. Working with the Public Works Department, we worked to a couple of different scenarios and settled on this one. Essentially, we'd like to capture 100% of our additional costs, but we realize that that's not really realistic. So as a good partner, we tried to split that 50-50. When you look at the 3 lines of businesses, we're really about 50-50%. So I think Meridian businesses and residents cover 51% of the 214,000 as we look at the whole of the business. And then Republic Services, it keeps the other 49%. So kind of pushing more to commercial and industrial for less impact on residential was the idea.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Rodney, help me just maybe walk the council through why not come back and ask the city to cover the increased cost for the household hazardous waste, the increase with the landfill. I mean, I guess the question I'm getting is why the labor and not these other increases that you guys are choosing to absorb? Why this one? So
there was no increase in disposal this time. So there was one in previous year and we asked for it then and it was 100%. In household hazardous waste, it's reconciled annually. So the 7,900 doesn't go away. It remains in the reconciliation. So, if we moved it even a penny, it would go the other direction. So it doesn't really make sense to change it. The other consideration is that the city of Meridian is growing so fast. And if the residents don't utilize household hazardous waste in proportion, the cost won't raise proportionately. So we may, depending on how much the city grows, actually roll it back another penny next year. Just an annual reconciliation. It doesn't go away. We just roll it forward.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
just maybe a plug for those in the room. That's, the Household Hazardous Waste Program is one that I've received small handful of complaints about the level of customer service. I think that when our citizens show up there, they have a, correct or not, a preconceived notion that that's City of Meridian. And the customer service that they've received has not lived up to the expectation of the City of Meridian. So I'm all for another penny if it gets the level of service that our citizens expect. So just for what it's worth, I hear the rationalization behind it makes sense. But I think that's an area that, I know it's a third-party vendor, it's not a Republic piece, but again, Republic's got a great reputation for customer service. I'd hate that a third-party entity is hurting your guys' reputation, just like it's hurting the City of Meridian's reputation.
We appreciate that. Increasing the rate wouldn't change that piece of it. So, but thank you for the comment.
Yep.
Council, any further questions? Okay, thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much, Mayor and Council.
So this is a public hearing. Mr. Clerk, do we have anybody sign up to provide public testimony on this item?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay, well, I only see one person online in the Zoom. He's a staff member, but if you'd like to provide testimony, he's also a resident. Use the raise your hand function at the bottom, and we're happy to bring you in, or anybody else in the room that'd like to come forward. Seeing none. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I'm not going to make a motion to close the public hearing. I guess maybe keep it open for a conversation with council. We had this before us a couple weeks back. Councilmember Strader, who's the SWAC liaison, I think shared some feedback, at least from the SWAC on that. I'd almost like to continue this for another week until Councilmember Strader can be here to provide some additional context. I know we're up against a time crunch for October, but is there any risk if we continue this out a week?
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Cavanagh, no. I spoke with the utility billing manager about the timing because there's a resolution that has to get done. There's 2 MOUs that have to get approved that go in conjunction with that. And I asked her whether it mattered if it was the 14th or the 21st, and she said either one of those dates was fine.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you have an opinion, or anybody has any thoughts one way or another, but
I have no opinion on the matter.
then I guess maybe an additional request either for you or for legal. If we were to continue this, could we continue it to the 6 o'clock meeting, to our main meeting where we typically take public testimony?
No reason why you couldn't.
So, Mr. Mayor, with that, I move that we continue item 20, public hearing for adoption proposed Republic Service solid waste fees to September the 14th at the 6 o'clock meeting.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to continue this item until September 14th at 6 p.m. Is there any discussion? Mr. Clerk, just to verify, will we have Council Administrator back next week to, especially if Councilman Cavanagh is hoping for input?
Mr. Mayor, we should, yes, we'll have Councilwoman Strader. We will not have Councilman Hoagland.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the item is continued till next week at 6 p.m. Thank you. Next item up is resolution number 21-2284. Resolution of the mayor and city council of the city of Meridian reserving the foregone amount for fiscal year 2022 for potential use by the city of Meridian in subsequent years as described in Idaho Code 63802. Mr. Neri, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Probably this is the oddest resolution we had to do because I've never done one for zero. But we felt from a transparency perspective, this was the right way to do this. So after the budget hearing, when the conversation was had with council about reserving foregone revenue for the future of $454,885, the finance department at that time had calculated that that was basically the remainder of the 3% that we did not take in this budget year, but because of other adjustments we've made, and Brad can get to the details if you want to, but other adjustments we made, we have reached that 8% cap total that's allowed by the code. And so now there is no foregone to take, but we still felt having a resolution at least clears it up from the public perspective, since we talked about reserving it at a certain amount, and that's reserving it at zero.
Thank you, council. Any questions for Mr. Neri?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I don't know if Mr. Neri or Mr. Purser could explain, the House Bill 389, this is the impact from that legislation. Is that what we're dealing with here?
Mayor, Councilman Hoagland, you're correct. This is the result of we have the 8% cap. If we were to take that foregone, like we were planning on it, that would put us over that 8% cap, or we can't take that foregone amount, which is why we're adjusting the.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
Brad, if the cap is new, is that correct? The 8% cap is brand new.
Yes.
So I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around all the action that went on. I mean, this was done at the very last hours of the legislature. So they capped our how much we could take for revenue, property taxes on new annexation and development. I don't know if I'm classifying that correctly. Is annexations and I don't have it in front of me. New construction, yes. Thank you. Thank you. And new construction, which we've always said we want growth to pay. And then we're a growing community like Meridian. We have to build, in this case, 2 new fire stations and a police precinct. And yet our budget is limited to 8%, which I think we came right up to with this year of construction that we are going to kick off. So it really constrains us, and there's no way to reserve any of the foregone moving forward. So it's revenue that it's gone. That's fine, because a lot of years we don't go back and pick up the foregone. But I guess with the construction, if you can use your crystal ball a little bit, because I know this is not going to be done in a single fiscal year. Will you be bumping up against the cap again next year in your estimation, or have you guys had time to even kind of look that far ahead?
Great question, Mayor, Councilman Hoagland. I know we are hovering around the 8%, so there is some impact there. So, this could happen in the future. We are right around that 8% from in our assumptions moving forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borton.
I think to Councilman Hoagland's his point on that lost revenue, it's almost $500,000 this year, and that has a compounding effect as well. So it's important. I appreciate you putting a bright light on this missing revenue that would have been growth funded. That not only do you lose $500,000, but it has a compounding effect. So it makes it very difficult.
So council, what's your pleasure on this resolution? Councilman Cavanagh?
I'm happy to approve resolution 21-2284, resolution by the mayor and city council for the city of Meridian reserving $0 of foregone for the amount of fiscal year 22. as described in Idaho Code 63-802 and providing an effective date.
I have a motion, a second to approve the resolution. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is agreed to. Next up is item 22, Mayor's Office, American Resource Plan Act funding opportunities, and turn this over to Mr. Miles.
Afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. Give Chris a second just to pull up a presentation that I did provide to you all last week, should be in your packets as well. Really, my intent today is to try and go through the presentation fairly quick and leave most of this to discussion for feedback to hear from you all. But let's see. I have it on my screen here, so let's go with that. Really, I think one of the interesting policy perspectives that you all get to decide on is sort of the use of these funds and whether or not to even use them. So what we're talking about today, American Rescue Plan Act, or what I'll refer to as ARPA moving forward, and the dollars that are associated with that come to Meridian. And really, I think the central question is what to do with these funds, if anything. Certainly do nothing is an option that's there. I think there's also sort of a once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity for you all to discuss what's best for the citizens of Meridian, the community of Meridian, to utilize these funds to set it in a better path going forward. So those are some of the things to consider. On top of that, we do have to account for staffing impacts. As we reported to you all a couple months ago with the Small Business Grant Awards, certainly there's a staffing impact to administer those types of programs. So that in the back of my mind, that's always something to consider as we go forward talking about ideas that are out there. Nonetheless, let's see, I'll go through a couple of the details really quick. So just for terminology, American Rescue Plan Act, as I said, ARPA funds, it's combined a couple of different federal funding sources, Corona State Fiscal Recovery Fund, or the CSFRF, or the Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, the CLFRF. There's a lot of acronyms here. Those combined to make up the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund program. Again, we'll just refer to it as ARPA to make things simple. So at the national level, it's over $350 billion worth of funding. To the state, what that means is about $1 billion, $1.1 billion roughly to the state and non-entitled units, which are governments that are not receiving funds directly through the state. So other cities that are below, I believe it's a 50,000 population threshold. To the city of Meridian, a direct allocated funding potential for $12.8 million. So that's the bucket of money that Meridian is allocated or could be allocated if we accept the funding. None of the dollars have been accepted to date by the city of Meridian. We did have to file a report that essentially said, yes, we're aware of that funding. We haven't taken any of that funding that was due on August 31st, which the finance department did file, and it basically said, yep, we've taken $0 as a city. But just so you know, that was a requirement of the filing. The federal government, as they were putting together these funds, basically looked at a lot of the Housing Community Development Act requirements as they put together what cities get what level of funding. It takes into consideration the population of the various cities, and it takes into account community needs, extent of poverty, population, overcrowding statistics, housing stock, and that's how they arrived at the $12.8 million for the city of Meridian. Through the administration of the funds, essentially the payments are paid out in what are called two tranches. One in May of 2021 is available. Again, for the city of Meridian, it would become available when the city says, yes, we want that first round of funding. And then another round of funding in May of 2022, and it's basically split 50%, 50%. So the city could afford, what is that, $6.4 million in this current year, $6.4 million in the following fiscal year of 2022. The funding does have to be obligated, or what they're calling incurred, by December 31st of 2024, and funds have to be expensed by December 31st of 2026. Any funds that are not obligated or expensed at the end of 2026 go back to the federal government. So that's sort of the timing to keep in mind that, yes, there is some time to think about what to do with these funds and what to consider to use them for. Throughout that period, there are interim reports. As I mentioned, the first one that we already filed through the finance department, there will be initial interim reports throughout, as well as quarterly project and expenditure reports. As the name states, filed quarterly. Essentially, the city of Meridian would file its first report, and then from there forward, file quarterly reports there. And I know I am going through this kind of quick, so if you do have questions, feel free to interrupt me if you like. Sorry, I keep having back at the other TV screens. So what can the funds be used for? There are 4 general large buckets that I'm sure many of you have seen or come across. Essentially, bucket 1 is to respond to the public health emergency or its negative impacts. And there's a whole section of code that talks about what are all those various things, and we can talk about some of those. Second is provide premium pay for essential workers. Third is what a broad category of providing government services, and that's done through a prescriptive calculation in the code that says what is the revenue loss to the city or the agency at the time, and that can be used for general services. And last but not least, there's an investment in water and sewer and broadband infrastructure as the 4th bucket. What does all that really mean? I think first and foremost, responding to the public health emergency and its negative impacts, that's pretty straightforward. Generally, it's characterized in the guidance as testing, vaccines, rollout, nursing care costs of similar impacts for those, emergency medical response, personal protective equipment, COVID mitigating payroll is a potential under that, communications for COVID, housing assistance, education support because of COVID. And again, you can see that those are very large in and of themselves, along with just that general bucket. But essentially, it's what would we do because of COVID? And that's what those funds are for. Second is providing premium pay for essential workers. Again, you could do, for those employees that are eligible, you could do premium pay as defined under what was known as the HEROES Act, as similar to the CARES Act funding, nursing home staffing, food production services and their staffing, public health safety staff. And again, as you think about Meridian, while we may not have those things directly, certainly you can partner with other agencies through this funding mechanism, as long as all of the guidance is adhered to by both of those agencies if you do reach out and start to partner. Third bucket is what I touched on in terms of general services. This is what I would classify as the gates are much more wide open. It's characterized as revenue loss, and the finance department has done the calculation to bucketize what that proportionate share of funds would be. But it's general fund relief for projects, programs, and broad economic impact. And I think one of the central things to remember is that through all this, the U.S. Treasury has intentionally written the guidance with broad generalizations to allow the municipalities and the agencies broad interpretation of what that means. So we've worked with legal and the finance department to brainstorm some ideas to say, what does all of this mean? What can we do with these funds? But again, the government services through revenue loss is a much broader bucket than the other 3. Last but not least is investment in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. That guidance, specifically for water and sewer, follows the EPA guidance on clean water safe state revolving fund projects, as well as the drinking water state revolving fund project guidance published by the EPA. So those 2 pieces of guidance are several pages long that give example projects that the money can be used for, and they're pretty straightforward. And I will characterize it, right, wrong, or indifferent, as generally anything that's water or sewer related, these funds can probably cover. Broadband has some additional guidance, which we've talked with the IT department, and specifically broadband is a little tricky in Meridian, just given the parameters that we have to deal with in the guidance, according to the IT department, that there's not a ton that we can do with broadband with these funds. There is potential to do some, so we can explore those further if you do. We get into the funding streams and the breakdown, put up the $12.8 million, approximately a little more than 12.8. The total Meridian distribution is represented by that figure. $4.6 million is representing of the revenue loss calculation that finance department had done. And that's that third broader bucket that can be used for general government services. The remainder of that, the 8.1, is what you could utilize for the three other buckets if the revenue loss utilized its full potential. So it's a proportionate share. If you use some or all of the 4.6, your 12.8 million is reduced down to that 8.1 or some fractional share there. So if we look at the buckets of money that are out there and the buckets of things that the money can be spent on, I sort of just put together a simple matrix to say, what could the funds be? How could they be bucketized? So for the COVID response, the first thing we talked about, as well as the eligible premium pay and the water, sewer, and broadband, the city could decide to allocate some or all of the $12.8 million to any one of those buckets. It could be 12.8 into one and be done. It could be $1 and then spread the money across the rest. The revenue loss, as I stated, the city can expend up to $4.6 million, and then the other buckets would be proportionally a share of whatever the remainder was through that. Essentially, again, any of these dollars can be spent in whatever manner the city decides best and how the breakdown works best for the projects that are chosen. So with that, some initial recommendations that we talked about through the finance and legal department and mayor's office, as it pertains to the COVID response, sort of how do we respond to COVID? What can we do with it? The initial suggestion is to allocate $160,000 towards air filtration systems for city facilities to improve the air quality for COVID response in the city facilities, and the estimates that were there were generated by the Public Works Department for all city facilities. So you're talking City Hall, Parks and Rec, water, wastewater facilities, and all of the fire stations. On top of that, suggest holding the remainder $3.92 million to see what happens. Are there other COVID impacts that we don't know about yet? We don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that the numbers are increasing. So the suggestion is put that remainder aside. Haven't really identified anything specific to that just yet, whether that's through partnerships or city direct needs, don't know yet. Not recommending anything in the bottom left for eligible premium pay. Couple of variables that go along with that. The requirements that are in the guidance pretty much require 100% dedicated time is required for any employee. So if myself were 100% response dedicated to COVID, that's how I'm eligible for anything related to that bucket of money. Any employee that has 100% dedication, which I don't know that we've done that exercise yet, and I don't know that we have put in that effort. And I don't know how many employees we have that are 100% dedicated to COVID, but that's an exercise that would need to be done to determine if there are any, and if there are, what's that fractional share or total share of that. So that's why we're not recommending anything in that bucket at this point in time. Certainly something that we could consider. We do recommend putting $4.6 million into the revenue loss bucket. Again, it's a wider net. You can do a lot of things as a city to improve the community and the projects, capital projects, and efforts that we could make as a city to advance the community. And then water, sewer, and broadband, recommend putting in the other half of what would be that 8.1 share into the water, sewer, and broadband. What does that all mean specifically? As I mentioned in the COVID response, roughly the $160,000 for the HVAC air filtration systems. I think that's a wise thing for the public in all of the public facilities as well as the employee base. What I'll call is a low cost, low hanging fruit project in terms of cost for these dollars, and recommend that that be considered in the COVID response. You move over into the revenue loss and the water and sewer. I'll kind of handle those both together. Certainly number one is the CFP projects. Anything in the CFP for the next 5 years in that bucket of money for revenue loss would qualify for these projects as far as we can tell. And it would make sense to relieve some of the CFP costs through these funds rather than the general fund. Additionally, that $4.6 million can also be used on, as I said, just about anything else that the city could think of. Roads and transportation projects are one that have come to the top of the city surveys for many years in a row. 3 surveys over time have identified the roads and transportations projects. So we recommend considering those funds for those types of projects as well. In the water, sewer, and broadband, again, the capital projects that are inside of that water and sewer qualification would qualify for the water and sewer broadband bucket. As well as cybersecurity, the IT department has identified increased cybersecurity efforts around the SCADA system that operates water and wastewater systems to improve that system, as well as anything related to energy efficiency inside of the water and wastewater buckets, because with the EPA guidance that is out there around the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, energy efficiency projects are identified in those categories. And so pretty clear nexus to those types of projects. And that could be anything from solar power at the treatment plant to biogas and biosolid gas recapture, energy efficiency studies, really those buckets within those water and sewer broadband categories are wide open within and of themselves, if that makes sense. Those are really the buckets that we see out there, and then something to get the conversation started at a high level. So I think I'll stop there, open it up for any conversation, questions that you all might have.
Thank you, Dave. Council, questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
thank you. Can you go back, Dave, can you go back to the slide that shows the 4 different areas that, the 4 different categories? First slide.
With the narratives?
That. So has the city, I mean, I'm not aware of any conversations that we have had regarding any partnerships that we've created or the city providing any of those funds to a public business. Is that something that the city's considered setting up, or what would that look like? It's my understanding that these funds are coming directly to the city, where most of the rest of the federal funds have been distributed to the state and then to the city. So this is a different scenario than for us as far as managing these dollars. So what would it look like? Would these need to be partnerships? I mean, I don't know that there's any, I mean, how would that work? How would a city, our city or another city decide one private company over another to distribute those funds? I mean, would it be set up in an application type of process, or how would, it's just a curiosity question.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Pro. In a nutshell, yes. So you are correct in that this is a different funding mechanism than we faced in the past with the CARES Act, in that it is a direct infusion to Meridian, not through the state. How would partnerships work? I believe, yes, we'd have to do that through some type of legal agreement with whatever agency or frankly, private business that we deal with. So either public agency or private business. As it pertains to the private business, if that were the direction, similar to the small business grant program, I would imagine we'd have to have an application process. We'd have to have criteria that those applications are scored against so that it's a fair and balanced appropriation to any of the private businesses. As it pertains to the public agencies, we have had some initial conversations with, I think a lot of agencies are in our boat as well. I think we might be the first one getting to you all to talk about it. A lot of people are sitting around and waiting to say, what's everybody doing? What should we do? Talking with the county, for example, I'll use housing affordability as an example. The county's getting roughly $93 million direct infusion to them. Boise, I believe, is in the $30 million range. If you look at that on a global county scale and say, okay, what can the county do, and what can Meridian do as part of that county? It becomes pretty complex pretty quick in terms of the legal agreements that are needed, the timing alone when you start talking about a project. We can absolutely do it, I believe. It just takes a lot of momentum. It takes a lot of dedication to figuring out what are all the steps that are required. The grant is very clear that we have to follow all of the requirements of the grant, and any subrecipient then has to follow that. So you could have in an agency to agency instance where, for instance, the county's dealing with their requirements of their funding, as well as any funding that any city were to allocate to them following that requirement as well. So kind of a double following of the rules. So that said, it's possible. It's through legal agreements. It's through following the guidance. All of the reporting is still required. And I think the brainstorming is really required in terms of what is it that can move the community of Meridian, the city of Meridian forward along with the valley if it's a partnership.
Mr. Mayor, follow-up question.
Councilman Pro.
Is Mayor's office aware of any requests that we've directly received from any of our private sector since our grant program ended? Do we have businesses that are following up with us and asking for additional funds?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Perot, no direct requests that I'm aware of to our office. I think in general, we have had conversations with the service groups, so the nonprofits. They are open and wanting to consider any conversations. I will characterize what they've asked for as just general, yes, we're looking for support, nothing specific. And again, they were more keen on, in the transmission emails that I had with them about being open guidance, flexible programs, flexibility within the funding mechanisms to help them be the most beneficial and leverage the dollars the best. I think, again, we're bound by what the rules say we can do. So I don't know that that flexibility that they're looking for is necessarily there without having further conversations.
And if I could add, I mean, I've heard business say, I didn't know about it. I would like to have applied for it as a fairness issue, not as I need that for my business to be surviving right now. It's just like other people got it. So I'd like to get some of that too, viewpoint. But they've been more not asking us to do it again, just that they didn't know about it at the time it was done.
Mr. Mayor, just to add to that point, we have talked with the chamber as well and asked them, what are the needs that are out there? They've characterized it as there's a lot of federal funding out there on their side of the streams as well. So coming from business programs, more dollars have opened up. So again, to the mayor's point, I haven't heard any direct requests since this program's been released.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
is there a timeline or a deadline in which we need to identify where those funds are going to go? And if the situation gets worse and we go back to mandatory masking and we see our local businesses in the same situation that they were in a year ago, I'd like council to discuss an estimate of funds to set aside to address those concerns, potentially through the grant program, again, similar to what we did in the past. I don't know, has there been, I didn't see that in the proposal, so I'm just curious if that's been discussed.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Pro, timeline wise, yes. And again, there are two critical keystone dates, December 2024 and December 2026. You have to have funds obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026. Outside of those two date timelines, I think it's incumbent upon the city for whatever it decides to meet those deadline criteria. So I think it becomes a level of complexity. If you're talking some big housing partnership, you probably need to start today to meet that 24 deadline and the 26 deadline.
If you go back to we have one of the recommendations is reserve 3.9 million, just specifically because we don't know what's happening. So
that was the, let's see. So in the top left on this bucket, the recommendation is to utilize $160,000 now for the air filtration, hold at least 3.9 million for exactly what you're talking about, Councilwoman Perot. What happens if?
Okay, I wasn't clear on that from the slide, so thank you for clarifying that. I assumed that there would be sooner deadlines than 2024, like they have done previously. They had the deadlines at the end. Well, but that was regulated by the state, right? The state was setting those deadlines for the end of the year for some of the grant program funds.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Perot, that was still the federal deadlines under the CARES Act program. The federal agencies set that deadline, or lost time tracks, December 2021 for the last cycle. That was a federal designation. It was not the state. But again, I think that lends itself to what the Treasury has done and stated that this is a much more broad program, much more broad guidance. And I think they've recognized that COVID's likely an ongoing thing, evaluate what the impacts are and afford that time. That said, there's also recognition that these capital projects, if that's the consideration, may take time as well as you go through design, appropriation of funds. I think that's part of why.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Dave, anticipated staff time to kind of keep monitoring, reporting, this something that's going to be managed out of the mayor's office? Is going to maybe our CDBG grant administrator? Is that something they're going to be asked to take on? What's the staffing plan around this?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kavner. I think in terms of administration, in terms of reporting and keeping track of the program and sort of guidance research, that's been done between our office, the legal department, and finance. Finance will be doing the reporting requirements. Again, Todd, CFO, has been conducting the reporting along with Karen. It's manageable. Yes, it is a burden. If you get into the conversation of things like the small business grant program that we did before, now you're talking additional time with finance, and we did utilize Tori through economic development, and that's a fair impact, fair amount of impact in terms of just staff. I'll stand here and
If
say
it's 4 projects, it's a lot less staff reporting time.
certainly the number of projects that we accomplished versus one versus many, you're going to have different reporting requirements and different time allocations. Mr. Mayor, was our intent to really report to you all today. Again, happy to stand here as long as you want me to answer questions, but we do have this on the agenda for next week as well. I'm happy to take questions in between now and then. We can come back and get some additional feedback. It's really a pulse check on, are we in the right arena? Are we tracking, or are there other things?
And one thing I asked Councilman Barton,
Go ahead.
I'll let you go ahead and go.
I just, Mr. Mayor, what's next week? If it's on the agenda next week, what happens then?
I think it's a little bit of feedback and further guidance after you've thought about it. If there's specific projects you'd like to, quite frankly, what I prefer council do is if you've got some thoughts to reach out to Dave during this week so that he can combine or come back and have a general conversation if there's those elements. From a very practical standpoint, you all know that roads have been an important component of what I think we should invest in. And we have a joint meeting with ACHD in a couple of weeks. And I think part of the conversation is if roads are something this council is interested in using the 4.66 million, if we could get some feedback on that component in case it has any relevance on any conversations we have with ACHD at that joint meeting. I understand we're not going to come up with a proposal. We're not going to be making votes next week. That's not the intention. It's just to continue the conversation on the overall direction, but to help us start formulating conversations which seem appropriate.
Okay, that's helpful. Mr. Mayor, I think, and maybe this is a process that's going forward, is going to happen, but yeah, at this early stage, I guess we don't know what we don't know. So I think it'd be helpful to have maybe at the next meeting, the background on kind of how you got here. And for each of these categories, what were the 6 to 8 to 10 different items that were discussed and considered, and how were they weighed? I kind of need to see the math. How you got to these recommendations would help before we can really weigh in, provide comment. I'm not a fan of funding roads with this or anything else. So that's one example of something that would give me concern. And I'd be curious to see what was on that list that wouldn't be recommended to go forward in light of that. So I think that background homework of seeing the specific things that everyone brainstormed, maybe council would supplement it for each of these categories, would help us make an ultimate decision on how to allocate it. My assumption is the first question Dave raised is, should we accept the funds? I don't think I can assume we're all going to proceed as if the funds will be accepted. It's the second question of how to allocate them that we'll focus on. So I think that'd be helpful for me to know that background. It also helps if we're going to be providing some suggestions of things that could be funded. They very well may have already been on your list amongst the group. I don't know who the group was that came up with these in the first place. So that'll help for next week. Go from there.
Well, just to answer a couple of the questions. all we did was the 4.66 million is the formula number from the federal government. We divided the rest of it in half. It's that simple from a very practical standpoint. The water sewer broadband number could be the entire remainder, or it could be in the other category. It just seemed prudent to find a number to hold for the future without knowing where COVID is headed long-term. So there's nothing there. It is intentional, but it's not formulaic in
Okay.
other than that element. Really, anything else is the CFP. That's the, I mean, you have a funded CFP with all the projects. So any dollars that you're using from this, you're just adding to your fund balance to pay off a CFP project, but that's what you could do. So yes, there may be a few new ideas, such as doing solar at the treatment plant. But there's not a list of, hey, why don't we go and do this idea? You know, there have been conversations such as, could we use this for the 9 Mile Creek? And the general response was, no, you can't. It doesn't qualify under this. You can't use it in the water sewer broadband. You can't use it in the, COVID response. Could you use it for the 4.66 million? Yes, you could from that standpoint. So it's really, at this point in time, if there's priorities within the CFP, the council thinks are more important that you want to use these dollars for, even though it's funded, those are the questions, or come with your own ideas that you think would make more sense for the conversation. Maybe we want to build a statue, nice big art project. We could do that, but it's not on the list. We're just trying to keep it focused on the things that we have in our CFP at this point in time for the most part.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Burt.
Excited to see where this discussion goes. At the end of the day, in my opinion, this is a lot of money. And there's a lot of different things that make a lot of sense that could benefit the community and both here at City Hall, City Hall proper, city properties and different businesses and organizations throughout our city. And so have we thought about maybe even, and it doesn't look like there's real imminent time frame. We have a lot of time to decide what we want to spend this money on, and we have a lot of time to spend it if we choose to do so. And after listening to council's comments, the first thought that came to my mind, what's council's and the mayor's desire about maybe even forming like a little committee of some type, nothing too big or too serious, but just to vet this to maybe a deeper level, include electeds, include city staff, include the mayor's office, and just start having a conversation. And the reason why I say that is, for me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to personally come up with different, I don't know that you're going to get consensus from to spend this type of money in a week. I just think it's going to be a little hair more difficult than that. So then comes my thought about, maybe having future discussions through a small committee of some type. Thoughts?
And I don't think we're looking for consensus. I think we're looking for direction. If that's the direction council gives, great. It's really to find out where is the desire of the council in what area. Because if that will help us determine who should be on there. If it's only spent on CFP projects, well, we're only going to use city staff. If it's that you want to do housing projects out into the community, then we should go pull people from the community. I don't want to do unreasonable expectations to a certain extent. Right. Keep it focused on where the relevant viewpoint of council is so that we can formulate that. But yeah, we're not going to be making decisions next week on anything. Again, just trying to give you guys an opportunity to come back and have more conversation.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I think it's Council President Burt's point. It could be really challenging to say, go do this next week. You need to come back with that, because clearly I think the easy answer is just fund CFP and on we go. Is that the right decision? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I think that there's some opportunity, and I think I appreciate Council President Lee's suggestion of let's invite some other feedback from some people, maybe outside of this building. Involve clearly mayor's office, council members, city staff. You know, Councilmember Borton introduced participatory budgeting a number of years ago, and we've done that 4 cycles, I think. Here's an opportunity maybe to take it to another level and invite the public to participate and share where they think their priorities are. At least for council to consider that, as long as there's not an immediate need. If there's a pressing project, something we want to move forward on right away, that's another conversation, but I'm not necessarily hearing that. So I'm supportive of maybe tapping the brakes, inviting a few other voices to this as a recommending body, perhaps for discussion in our 2023 budget hearing.
I would suggest we do it before then, because any capital project you're going to do, if you want to do a capital project, you wouldn't probably have time if you waited till then.
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Just to weigh in, I think probably all in agreement when I say, we don't want to use funds for ongoing. This is capital projects. These are things that will benefit the residents of this community in a way that saves them dollars down the road, that we can do some projects that work and get to them now, and that they won't have to pay for them in the future. I know it's tempting to say, let's just send this money back, pay down the debt. This is a massive amount of spending, and that's what DC's been doing right now. But unfortunately, the truth of the matter is it will just get reallocated and spent anyway. So since we have federal taxpayers in our community, we might as well take that opportunity and use their money, since we can't give it back to them, and spend it wisely. So, and I know in the discussions about cities receiving this money directly and whatnot, and we had the majority leader of the House say that cities are just taking their ARPA funds and spending it on ongoing expenses, so on. I don't know where he got that information, because it's like many other communities, they're going through this process right now and having that discussion. So I think we need to make sure we are using it wisely. And there are some projects, and I could channel Councilwoman Strader right now and say street lights, renovations, and that certainly qualifies. And things like solar, let's take a look at things that will save our taxpayers, ratepayers down the road, and use that money wisely. So what all of those projects are, I don't know, but I got some things I'll throw out there to you later, Dave, and see if they qualify or not. So,
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hoagland, you make some good points. And I do want to reiterate, our recommendation is, as you said, to use these on one-time funded projects, not ongoing costs, for the exact reasons that you talked about. To the reference that you made about property taxes in the state legislature, our internal auditor, our auditor in our finance side has provided guidance to the finance team that these funds are not to be used for property tax relief directly. So we've got differing opinions from our auditors and our finance department that they utilize. So that's why we didn't recommend that at this point in time. We can certainly go back and continue that look, but that's the recommendation at this time. As I'm hearing the sort of efforts around a committee, we can certainly work with the mayor and the council president to put together what that framework looks like. From what I'm hearing, maybe it's a couple of different stakeholder meetings with various entities, various representation throughout the city, not just businesses, not just service. So we can certainly look into that and see how that goes. I think to the mayor's point, we will get a lot of ideas and certainly how that plays out and how we evaluate those. I look forward to those discussions. Okay. All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
With that, we're at the end of our agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burt.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
second the motion.
Motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Council will call the meeting to order. For the record, it is September 7th, 2021 at 6 PM. We'll begin tonight's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Borton,
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Perot.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Councilman Burnt.
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. We'd all please rise and join us in the pledge. Next item is a community invocation, which tonight will be given by Ben Blakey with Compass Bible Church. If you'd all please join us in the invocation or take this of a moment of silence and reflection.
Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we come to you tonight and we want to thank you for our community. We want to thank you for the city of Meridian and just the grace that it is that we get to dwell together in peace and safety. And God, we lift up this group right now and we lift up this meeting to you, God, for all these individuals involved. Lord, when the choices they are faced with are those of right and wrong, God, give them courage and conviction to do what is right. And as they deal with so many decisions, just to better and best, God, give them the wisdom to know what is best and to decide what is best. Lord, we think of just the growth in our community and ask, God, that you would just give them wisdom to lead us through this time. We also just lift up our community and those that are hurting or those that are sick. God, we pray for your healing and your grace and your comfort. And we pray for those doctors and nurses and those on the front lines, God, just for encouragement and strength and protection for them. And so we lift up this community and we lift up this meeting tonight to you. And we ask for your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Next item up is the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
item 7 was updated for those who were looking at a previous agenda, but with that said, it was updated and corrected. Just wanted to make that a point before I made my motion. But with that said, I move that we adopt the agenda as published.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone signed up under public forum?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay, and with that, we will move into action items this evening. First item up is a request for reconsideration of City Council's decision of the Oasis CR 2021-004 and CR 2021-005. And turn this over to Mr. Neri.
Mr. Mayor. So I don't mean to usurp Mr. Neri, but before maybe we begin this item, I wanted to be upfront on the record. I wasn't attended this meeting in person. I watched the vast majority of it online live from a hotel room in Washington, DC, and then went back a couple days later and watched the entire meeting in its entirety. So I feel like I'm up to date on this issue and feel that I'm able to participate. But if remember the council got any concerns, I'm happy to hear to discuss it. If not, I plan to proceed as normal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Neri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So what you have in front of you is a request from the property owner, Mr. Sy, for reconsideration of the decision made by the council in this case. He's raised some issues here in his letter. So the way our request for reconsideration process works, it's not a public hearing. So this written communication is what you have to make your decision on. If you have any clarifying questions that you're unclear of that were raised, you can certainly ask Mr. Sy. I believe he's here. If you have any just to clarify, again, it's not testimony. There is no testimony from anyone else either. The decision point for the council is either to uphold the decision that was made and deny the request, or to reverse the decision that was made and grant the request and therefore then set it for a new hearing. And that would be a new public hearing that would get noticed and such as we've done previously. And the third option is if you think there's an issue or concern you have about the findings that were issued in this case that were approved, you can remand it for simply the findings to be redone. So.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Council, any questions for Mr. Neri? Then council, I will turn the conversation over to you. For any additional information you need, clarification, comments, motion direction?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burr.
I'm okay to make a motion if there's not any more discussion amongst the body. Okay. Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burr.
I move that we deny the request for reconsideration of the city council's decision of the Oasis item number CR-2021-0004 and CR-2021-0005. With that in mind, Mr. Neri, do we have to get, do you need further comment for the record, or can we just go off of what our previous decision was?
I guess just to be clear, and I just presume this.
Mr. Neri, before you do that,
Mr. Mayor, I'll second the motion.
motion is second.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I apologize. I'm assuming that you've reviewed this letter and don't believe it's risen to the level that requires a reversal. I know that was implied, but I just want to be sure that was the basis. So
That's exactly right. Second agree.
Is there discussion? Councilman Borton?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I looked at that August 27th, 2021 letter that Mr. Sy had provided for the request for reconsideration, and it raised some kind of procedural and substantive questions that I think were the basis of the reconsideration. But when I looked at what took place at the public hearing and the volume of information that the council was provided, both from the public and from the applicant, I agree with the motion maker. I think that record sufficiently explained the dialogue and basis for the ultimate decision that was made after gathering all of the input from all the parties involved, our staff included. So I didn't find anything sufficient within the August 27th request for reconsideration that would warrant changing the decision. So for all of those reasons and the reasons set forth on the record at the original hearing, I'm supportive of the motion.
Thank you. Council, any additional comments or questions on the motion? Okay, let's the clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Borton,
Aye.
Cavanagh, Perot,
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye.
Burnt.
All ayes, and the motion carries. Thank you. Next item up is a public hearing continued from July 27th, 2021 for a CHD use sick maintenance facility, H 2021-0029. I will turn this over to Joe. Do you have some questions, some comments first, or?
Mr. Mayor, yes, I just wanted to, if the council would like me to reiterate anything from the previous hearing, I can, but just, I guess to reiterate, we continued it in order to work with the applicant and ACHD maintenance facility staff to figure out some better language. It was my understanding that we came to an agreement on this revised language. In response to that, the ACHD Commission sent a letter, as I hope you guys have all read, that requested a 6-month continuance from now. So that I believe, my understanding, unless something's changed, that the motion tonight that is being requested by the applicant is to a 6-month continuance. And other than that, I do not have any other updates.
Thank you. Council, any questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Perot.
So those letters were dated on this same day, Joe. Is it possible that just they got crossed, or were there two different parties involved? I guess I'm trying to understand how we're working on that wording and then we get a letter basically back the same day. So were the different parties that made those decisions aware that, you know, this was being worked on? Because I believe the letter came from an ACHD commissioner and not the staff. But the staff was working on the wordings and the DA provisions. So is that kind of what happened? I'm just trying to understand what's transpired.
Sure. Councilman Perot, Mr. Mayor, I can't speak exactly to what happened behind the scenes for them, but I do know that a few days prior to the first, we were working on the language. Semi agreed to it and sent out that final report. It was that later that day that I believe the applicant, Representative Becky, And ACHG staff took that to the commission and they met on it. So that's why, and then we quickly did receive a response back. So I don't think it was something that they didn't see. My understanding is that the commission did see that. And so the response is based upon this as well as probably the overarching discussion.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Steve Price, General Counsel for the Ada County Highway District. Mr. Mayor, council members, I'm here really, the commission has asked for a 6-month deferral to May 2022. I think the letter speaks for itself, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I would like to, in advance, I'd like to thank your staff as well as Mr. Neri for meeting with us and working through some issues. The commission has decided to go ahead with the letter.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pearl.
watch that commission meeting, but can you clarify in our last hearing and in the letter that we received as well? There's been statements made that the city is requesting additional amount of an additional amount than from ACHD because of the nature of what you do beyond what we would any other applicant for a land use application. And I'm wondering if the staff has had an opportunity to make clear what we would ask any applicant, any private applicant on a land use, or as far as road widening and sidewalks and all those things. Has that been clarified? Is that more clear to the commission and the staff than it was since our meeting?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Pearl, it's a particular opinion within the district that a $10 million project in our 5-year work program that's being exacted for a project that only generates probably 200 to 300 trips is inappropriate. I think it's a bad practice. I think the view is it's a bad practice that as part of any development application, that a condition of that development application is to pick a project within the 5-year work program for improvement. That's a view that's held by commissioners.
Council, any additional questions at this time? Okay, thank you. And with that, council, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Morton.
move that we continue H 2021-0029. I guess it would be a 6-month continuance, so that puts it to mid-February. I guess we need to have a date specific. If there's a
They
date,
had a date of March 8th.
March 8th is
Correct. March or May, which one was it? March 8th.
to continue it to March 8th, 2022. Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman, Mr. Neri.
would part of that motion be to renotice the project?
Yes, please.
Agrees.
Second agrees for that. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the item is continued. Thank you.
See you guys in a couple weeks.
Next item up is public hearing continued from August 10th, 2021 for Woodcrest Townhomes, H 2021-0015. I will open the continued public hearing with staff comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This application was continued from the August 10th public hearing in order for the applicant to prepare a parking analysis for the overall area. And that was submitted and is part of the record. The analysis that was submitted addresses the estimated parking demand for the proposed development and the existing parking supply and demand on adjacent commercial lots, which determine there is adequate parking for the overall area. The applicant will provide more information on this study in their presentation tonight.
Thank you, council. Any questions for staff? And would the applicant like to come forward?
Evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Blaine Warmer, Blaine Warmer representing the applicant on this project. Our office is located at 4355 Emerald Street in Boise. And yes, last time we were here, parking and the joint parking between the two uses seemed to be the topic of hot discussion. So what was suggested that we prepare a parking analysis of the entire center, including the commercial uses, office, and the proposed townhome project. So that's what you have before you tonight. I'm happy to go into whatever detail you'd like to discuss, but basically the study analyzed the parking requirements for the townhome project on its own. And then it analyzed the parking uses by going out and actually doing field counts based on the highest and the peak use for the parking lot and the commercial uses there. And that was analyzed, and it was found that there was more than sufficient parking available for the collective uses there, as well as in light of the fact that there is a reciprocal parking access agreement for those parcels. So again, I think the study speaks for itself, but I'd certainly be happy to try to answer any questions the council may have.
Council questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Borton.
can the applicant or Mr. Neri comment on this cross-parking agreement? Do you literally have a recorded cross-parking agreement that encumbers the Louis property, for example, with a right benefiting your parcel to use their parking?
Actually, yes, there is a cross-parking agreement for the entire commercial subdivision there and that includes this parcel as well. What we're doing, though, because our use would be a residential use, we are proposing to have the our property removed from those CCNRs and actually have written into our CCNRs that parking in anywhere other than the townhome project for the townhome uses is not allowed. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, we are part of that. There is an existing recorded cross-parking agreement for the commercial uses that includes this parcel.
It does. Thank you. I thought that was, I seem to recall, I thought that was one of the concerns in the prior discussion, whether there was a binding legal right that encumbers the property, or is it just a cooperative friendly agreement?
No, it's written into the CCNRs as a recorded document.
Okay.
Council, any additional questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Blaine, I know one of the other rationale of the continuance was for you to engage with the neighbors, particularly about the elevations on some of those units that we're going to butt up against the existing neighborhood. I see in the letter to staff, you guys didn't make any changes. I'm just curious if you can give council a flavor of what those conversations were like with the neighbors and ultimately resulted in not making any changes.
Well, we're not making any changes. What we've chosen to do is the preliminary plat is going to come back to you with a site plan. It's going to show the details of the actual dimension setbacks, things that we can get into in a little more detail with the preliminary plat. We are open to moving things around, and as if the property owners, any of them that are affected by this, want to discuss that, we're more than happy to discuss it. We still have to get through this part before we bring a preliminary plat to you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pearl.
Just want to make sure to summarize that I'm understanding. So you're going to be removed from the cooperative parking agreement with commercial properties. That's going to be your request.
That's correct.
In your CCNRs, you're going to require all residents to park on property that they're permitted to park on within the development.
Correct.
And then there are 9 additional spaces that aren't dedicated to a unit.
Correct.
And then the parking study analysis that was done says that you should only need 27 spaces for 19 units.
Correct.
Which is less than what the city is requiring. Is that right?
Less than what the city's requiring?
Yeah, I can't remember. Sonia, did you put in here how many spaces the city was requiring in the summary? I don't see it.
I don't believe I did. Are you asking about the residential portion of the
Yeah,
proposed
is the city
development?
not gonna give that number until the plat is proposed, or I can't remember off the top of my head what the staff report said.
Well, the 2 units or 2 parking spaces are required for each unit. I believe the applicant can confirm that, but I believe there's garage spaces as well as parking pad spaces, and they're in excess of the code requirements.
Correct. The actual driveways of each of the units, the double car garage will have 2, obviously, and the single car garage 1. And those actually weren't even taken into account in the study. So there will be extra parking beyond what even the study says.
The garage spaces were not taken.
Right, because, well, they counted the garage spaces and they counted the separate spaces that we've shown on our concept plan, but they did not include the actual driveways, which will have parking available.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
So to follow up with that, you have, I mean, so exactly what is your total then if you're including everything that?
Well, if you were to,
'Cause-
we have 40.
Yeah.
Like the study said, but if you were to add the parking literally in front of the garages as additional parking, there'd be 31 more spaces. Now, I think that might be a bit aggressive because a lot of people that have 2-car garages park 1 car in there while they put all their stuff on the other side. So I wouldn't stand here and try to sell you on 31 spaces, but there would probably be a good 15 extra spaces that this study doesn't address. Probably conservatively so. That's why they did what they did.
Okay.
Council, any additional questions, or comments for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council.
Archer, we have any signed up for this public hearing?
Mr. Mayor, 5 people signed in to state they wish to testify. First is Steve Calverley.
You could please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Be recognized for 3 minutes. Wait till you get to the microphone, please.
Pretty loud, so normally you can hear me anyway. 2561 Grapewood. Steve Calverley. I've got a question first, and why would you remove from the reciprocal parking agreement? That takes a lot of stress off our roads by them being in that reciprocal parking agreement. I have a lot less fear if they can park at Louis instead of going on our connecting road. So I don't understand that. I don't know why that would be to the advantage of the community or to the advantage of certainly the homeowners. I guess when I purchased my unit, I think the terminology is legal certainty. And what I don't understand is that you live, work, play environment that we have in that neighborhood. We've got the dining in Louis. I don't understand. There's plenty of commercial opportunity there. You could put a medical office, you could put a bakery, daycare, et cetera. We've got plenty of new apartments. We have plenty of new townhomes. I don't know why it has to be there. And I think that wasn't what was sold to those neighbors when we all bought our houses. And so that's the one thing I just view is I don't understand what the need is. And I'm certainly I've seen a lot of these type units coming in, and I really don't see that there's sufficient parking. And I understand the 40 parking spots, et cetera, but I haven't seen that work that way because most of those people don't park in their garage. They park on the street. And so anyway, I think the thing is the live, work, play is the big deal for me. But one thing is I would require them to not remove from the reciprocal parking agreement. I think that's a big deal for our neighborhood. Thank you. Questions?
Council, questions? Councilman Cavanagh?
Steve, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but since you live in the neighborhood, this can maybe help me. Are there any homes that take access into their driveway off of North Hickory? Does North Hickory just serve all your other neighborhood streets where the homes take their access?
I believe that's true.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And just for the record, unless it's in the DA, whatever they do within their subdivision regarding cross parking is not subject to the actions of the city council on this issue. So it's really out of our hands to a certain extent, just so you're aware.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Morton.
just a question for, and maybe Mr. Neri can comment, the phrase that was just used, reciprocal parking agreement, is that it's not a document I see in the application anywhere. Is that a recorded document distinct from what's being referenced as a CC&R's obligation?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and maybe Sonia might have a different perspective, but that's all I understand that is. It is part of their CC&Rs for that commercial subdivision. When this property was annexed in 1992, the city did not require a DA at that time. And so there was no agreement with the city to require cross parking there. So there may be cross access there, but and the cross parking may be imposed on themselves, but it's not a city requirement.
One other thing you did mention, the 4-unit complex is directly behind my house. I would have a preference to move that over to the empty field if they're capable of doing that. That would be definitely less evasive than having a 4-unit, 2-story behind my house.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, next is David Mcdonald.
And if there's anybody online that would like to provide testimony, please use the raise your hand feature at the bottom, and we can bring you in for comments.
Mayor, City Council, it seems like I keep coming to all these hearings, but Dave McDonald, 2579 East Grapewood. I'm a neighbor to Mr. Calverley here. There's a lot of concerns here that I don't have with obviously what the dental office type model slated earlier. But long story short, I did research the original hearing where it was discussed about the requirements for cross parking agreement, and removing that sends more red bells up the flagpole, because we definitely, with 4,000 cars on that collector, cannot afford any parking on Hickory. It's a disaster if that would happen. And the cross parking agreement for the 5 lots in this subdivision was recorded as part of the final plat hearing in February 4th, 2003, to be part of the plat. That was what the discussions were covering as a requirement in that meeting minute for that hearing. So with cross parking, and the reason why it was put in there from the meeting minutes was there wasn't enough parking to be contained within the lot for Louis' Restaurant. We needed to spill out into the other lots, and we see that. We know that. Removing the cross parking and saying that those are available as options also are seeming to be in contrast to all of these unauthorized parking signs. You will be towed on all these lots. You can see them prominently on every entrance for the tanning salon, for the restaurant, for the mortgage place. I think the bank is the only one that does not have that. I have exposure to human factors and usability type engineering when I deal with projects that I do. There's always the issue of what works on paper doesn't necessarily work in real life. 5 lots closest to Louis, for instance, aren't usable readily for the residents there because of accessibility. I'm assuming there is a vinyl fence that's probably going to be blocking off the gazebo side of this project. I posted a lot of questions on this, and there's also the questions regarding consistency between the concept plan and the preliminary plat. If you approve based on the only thing we have right now is the concept plan, and things change significantly, does that violate that consistency requirement? The other thing about this unit is touting the smaller units as 1-bedroom units. I'm counting that there should be, i.e. an office or a second bedroom on those units. And the ones that are being counted as 2-bedroom units has room for a third bedroom or an office. If you max out bedroom utility, because one of the things that I've been looking at is my example townhomes. And if you look at these closely, these renderings match very closely what this project is. There's a potential of 36 bedrooms if I don't use any of them as offices for these larger units. There's a potential of 14 bedrooms for the smaller units if I don't use any of them as offices. If I take 10 away because they might be used as offices or storage or whatever, I'm still more than what is being counted as potential people with parking requirements for this unit. So I just urge you to really say, does it work in paper? Does it work in reality? I'm observing from the townhomes that I've been looking at, all of the parking spaces were used up and they were still parking on the streets adjacent.
Council, any questions?
Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Mr. McDonald, right?
Yes.
It's nice to have you back here. You know, I've appreciated your testimony a month ago and when you've been here a few times about different projects that are here. I think you bring a certain pragmatism that sometimes we don't always get the city council. So I appreciate you being here. My question is particularly about Hickory Way, because I think that to me is the biggest area of concern about cars parking there. We see all the time apartment complexes with ample parking, yet people still park on the streets because it's closest to their front door. And what I'm seeing here with this particular project is that at least the layout that's before us is there has been some thought to try and prevent that. I'm just curious, as somebody who's watched a lot of these different projects come in, and I'm sympathetic with the concern about Hickory, is there something that you would rather see done with the layout that would further prevent additional cars from parking along Hickory?
Well, using the example townhome project that I had, they had little islands of parking between a few of the units that allowed for eight vehicles to park in there. You see the little sliver of 4 units parking up towards the grassy area by Hickory. You see the 5-unit parking area really more convenient to Louis, and that's typically always filled with Louis parking right now. I pretty much consider those a gimme to the Louis restaurant. I really don't consider those in the location unless they were moved closer to that private drive or some sort of parking island, more accessible to and from that private drive. It might ease the concern.
Thank you.
Council, any additional questions? If there's only 2 that wouldn't indicate they wish to testify. Is there anybody else who'd like to provide testimony on this item? Okay, seeing no one, would the applicant like to come forward for final remarks?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Wayne Warmer again for the applicant. I guess what I would say in elaboration with respect to the reciprocal parking agreement is the reason we're talking about taking it out is because we don't need it. The Institute of Transportation Engineers has done an awful, I understand what's on paper may not always reflect what's going on the field, but the way you mitigate that is you do the absolute best you can with respect to field data. And that's exactly what happened here. The traffic engineer that we hired to do this met with a restaurant owner who is by far the largest user of parking out in this development, by far, as you can see. They found their peak times, their peak and then their second peak. They went out there and did the counts during those times. And they came up with what they did, which if you read the report gives us a significant margin, a factor of safety, if you will. And so we don't need the reciprocal access agreement. We need 27 spaces. What we're showing now on the plan is that plus 13. And as we discussed earlier, the additional driveway potential parking even adds to that. So there is no reason we need to be still as a part of that agreement. That seemed to be the biggest concern of Steve, and I apologize if I didn't get his last name, but Mr. Mcdonald as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have remaining.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Elaine, I can't remember, one of the pieces of public testimony touched on there was some concern about a fence being in place that would kind of impede potential residents from parking in those parking stalls near Louis and being able to access their home. I didn't see anything that spoke to that, but I very well could have missed that. Can you elaborate if there's anything articulated or planned to be a vinyl fence or any type that would prevent people that are parking in those, I guess, southern stalls from being able to access the pathway in the gazebo to get to their home?
No, I don't.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Apologies if you touched on this a month ago. I missed this in the notes potentially. Why not add parking stalls there on that common space? That's
You talking about the southeasterly portion of the project?
yes.
There's no reason we can't. We had to throw out something, and we thought that we came up with a number of spaces both in that area and then a little further north by the closer to where our road intersects Hickory. We have, I think, 5 spaces there as well. And we just spread those out as best we thought we could for this plan. There's nothing keeping us from adding more. That was part of the study, is to see what we really need. And I think we're sufficiently parked, but if there's some compromise we need to do, we're open.
Mr. Mayor, just for comment.
Councilman Cavanagh.
I do think that you are sufficiently parked on paper. I think you touched on that, people park in their driveways because their garages are full of stuff. So I get you counted garage space, but not drive space. I think that kind of evens out. For me, it's always, again, about, I touched on this earlier, you got complexes that have the appropriate amount of parking, but it's not in the close proximity to where people live. And so they're always going to find the path of least resistance. And I think that Southeast Common lot creates some good opportunity for, I think, a big chunk of your units for people to park there as opposed to other places, which then kind of exacerbates it and pushes it back.
Sure, the closest distance between 2 points being that straight line,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pearl.
Yeah, in my opinion, you're gonna have at least 2 vehicles per unit, 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, just depending on, even if you have a couple that's living in a 1 bedroom, they'll probably each have a vehicle. And so your 40 spaces are taken up there with your 19 units. And then that really doesn't leave a whole lot of room for guests. And so, and I don't know how much you pay attention to what we do up here with our various applications, but we're consistently having conversations about there not being enough parking, even when applications are meeting what seems like a reasonable standard. And so that's the root of where this is coming from, is that it's a constant conversation we're having here. And it's just that we have scenarios where, there are more people living together than there ever has been because of the cost of renting, the cost of housing. And so we're preparing for the fact that there may be additional vehicles in multifamily types of properties than we've accounted for in the past.
And I know exactly what you're talking about, and I certainly am sensitive to that. I've had quite a bit of experience with subdivisions where the builder came in with 5 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms, because a couple of them are going to be offices or playrooms or whatever. And then it turns out that in times when rents get tight, that more people start moving into the house, and pretty soon a 2-car garage, even a 3-car garage with the driveway up front is not sufficient. So I think that's where this project maybe breaks that mold a little bit, just because it doesn't have the opportunity for the multiple bedrooms. I totally agree that there's every chance in the world that the 1 unit or one bedroom unit could have people with 2 cars. But I think if that were to happen, that again, we have the garage and the driveway, and I think we still meet what we need to. I am, however, more than happy as we go through the preliminary plat process, happy to discuss adding more parking at the southeast corner there to mitigate some of that.
Council, any additional questions or comments? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Council Board.
I'll kick off a comment. I'm still lost on this one issue, and maybe Sonia can clarify it, but I just don't see any of the stuff in the record. The staff report with regards to parking, the staff report references a proposed DA provision or a DA with a provision to address the parking, but there's not. I just didn't see proposed language. I don't see anything with the CCNRs or any reference to this development coming out of the CCNRs and whatever parking provisions in it. So I just feel flying blind to be able to articulate any condition that addresses parking specifically. Just because there's not any documents to look at, that there's no reference to anything or suggested language. So to me, it just seems super loose and hard to define.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, just to kind of, got a lot of loose ends here and want to make sure we understand moving forward what possibly could happen. You know, we've got A and B here in front of us, amendment to the comprehensive plan, a future land use map, changing some of the property from commercial to medium high density, and also rezoning 2.1 acres from limited office to R15 medium high density residential. So it's going from a commercial office property to residential would be what we're looking at. We had concerns about parking from the commercial areas and how that would impact if this does become residential. Would there be spillover from that into the residential? So they brought forward a parking plan, and which seems to say that no, there's not going to be a conflict of those overflows from commercial to residential. So now it sounds like we're also, and rightly so, concerned about, well, what will the impacts be for residents, you know, going into commercial? Should there be that a cross-access agreement, cross-parking agreement? And in some ways, I think that's a protection for residents that not to have that, but I don't know. And I guess are the questions we're trying to answer at that next stage, or when this comes before us for preliminary plat and we go, no, we need more parking here. You need to move that there. Residents don't want that there. They don't want a 2-story. They want single story and all those things. However, I'm versed enough in this to know that sometimes when you're changing the comp plan and the rezone, that's when you can do the things that need to be done. But, and I don't know if this is Sonia or Bill, when we go to that, if we go to that next step, is that something that we can really work on mitigation of some of those other details? I mean, to me, what they're asking for, it hasn't been commercial for many, many, many years, and it's not likely to go commercial. So what do we do with that land? Is the request for residential appropriate? And as we were moving forward, we wanted that parking study. That is done. It showed there isn't an impact. So where does that leave us? Nope, it's going to remain commercial. Or do we move forward to the next step? But then how do we mitigate the issues that are being brought up now based on this site plan, which may change when the applicant comes forward to us next time? So how much pull do we have in the next step if we're to go to that next step?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hoagland, all good thoughts and questions and considerations. Right now, this is just a rezone request, so it is just a conceptual development plan. So if there's something you don't like about it, it should be pointed out and maybe corrections made to the plan. Or conditions placed in the development agreement accordingly. However, staff will be looking at the parking to make sure it meets the minimum standards with the preliminary plat application, which will also go before you, and you will have an opportunity then to comment. But like you said, now is your opportunity if you want anything in the development agreement above and beyond our minimum standards to place it in the development agreement. If we wait until the preliminary plat level, we really don't have that ability at that time. It's just more if they're meeting the minimum standards or not. Mr. Neri, if you have anything else to add.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, no, I would agree with Sonia. I mean, again, the opportunity to form the DA is now with the rezone. Again, I think the conflict or concerns were expressed at the last hearing was, again, you can restrict this property and what they can do, but we cannot restrict the adjacent property. And so that concern about the commercial spillover was what the council discussed at that time. Again, we can't really affect that. We can't affect this one, but again, you've heard both good and bad on that too.
So council, I'm going to add nothing of value to this conversation, but sometimes I think it needs to be said just from a very practical standpoint, whether or not the rezone and you want to move forward. I just encourage the owners of Louis, whoever's managing this area, to be very diligent in working with one another. Because I am really concerned when I see all these unauthorized parking signs. This development, once developed, is going to impact Louis more than it's going to impact the residents that live here. Because it's going to push people from where they're currently parking into other places they've not parked before. I was at Louis for lunch, for attending the Kiwanis this last week, and University of Idaho was there and others were there. It's busy during that time frame, and people are parking in this dirt lot currently. So it's going to change the area as this area redevelops. And I think people that are having businesses there and living there just need to be very cognizant to work together to figure out how it's going to impact whatever occurs, because it's not going to be the same. You know, people from Louis are going to have to go to a different area to park if they're not allowed to cross access into these areas, and the people here can't cross access into Louis. They might have to go over to the Meridian Trophies. Well, they can get towed. We don't want that to happen. I think that's the end result of whatever decisions are made. We want people to have adequate parking. We want people to access all these restaurants. We want people to be able to get into their homes and have neighbors over in the evening. Work together to try to figure that out as this moves forward, I think is an important part to make sure parking is in the right place for the right reasons at the right times. So little value, but I just want it to be said that I think there are solutions here, but you're going to have to work together to figure it out. Otherwise, it's going to create a big mess in the future. And since we don't have a DA agreement or provision, the city's involvement in that is going to be very limited from that standpoint. And it will create unhappy residents, and it will create unhappy customers, and that's what we want to avoid.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Burt.
Amen, brother. You nailed it right on the dot. Great job. Great explanation.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Hoagland.
Not close the public hearing, so I wouldn't mind hearing from Blaine. What?
And, yeah, I think maybe Lane's. And I think you might have someone over here that's part of your team that would like to speak as well.
And Lane, my question is, I guess, you see the issue we're wrestling with here. And the DA kind of is the vehicle to allow us to then make sure moving forward, things are going to be done appropriately. Now it's just a matter of figuring out what is appropriately, from your perspective, for what the residents there now, from what the council sees. So I look forward to your comments.
Well, I think we're on the same page because the project is required to provide a development agreement. And that development agreement is going to be a document that should have the preliminary plat coming along with it, because there may be issues that come up during the preliminary plat process that we want to incorporate into the development agreement. So I think the development agreement is the way Sonia has it as a condition of approval in the project itself is perfectly timed. So I just don't think you'd want to enter into a development agreement until the preliminary plat was completed in process. And so it goes along and it tracks simultaneously. So that's my take on it. I just think it would be better for everybody involved, both my client and the city, to have the development agreement mature as the preliminary plat process goes through the process. So, and again, we're extremely, we're sensitive to the parking issue. That's why we were very encouraged with this report. And not, like I said before, it's based on real field data. And it's not just out of some book somewhere. So I hope that answers your question. If there's anything else I can do before you close the public,
And I think your applicant wanted to join you at the podium.
then I think you're going to hear from Louis. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Members of council, maybe before the owner comes, and Sonia might be able to answer this as well, but maybe the solution to the concerns the council has, because there is no application for this project. There's an application to change the comp plan, and there's an application to rezone. Rezone is when a DA is allowed. It's hard to form a DA when I don't know what it's going to be. If the council desires to simply grant the change to the comprehensive plan to allow them to then apply, submit a preliminary plat with DA conditions that planning could then review, that might be a better sequence of this than trying to do a rezone now. I don't know, Sonia, is that off base? That seems to me like how we would normally go through the process.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Neri, yeah, the applicant opted not to submit a preliminary plat at this time to go with the rezone and the comp plan amendment. So yes, typically we would like to see that with the development agreement. The other option is to, and I'm not sure if time-wise we can do this, Mr. Neri, but to continue this application out until the preliminary plat catches up with it and act on them all together.
It's certainly either one of those paths, but I think that would maybe resolve some of the concerns. Is we can tie them together. Right now, I don't have anything to tie to it other than to say there's a development agreement that'll have to be modified again. So I'm not sure that that's really fruitful.
Mr. Moore? You can just say your name and address for the record.
My name is Louis Mullane. I live in Eagle, Idaho. And I'm the culprit that bought that property in 1995. And when I bought that property, there was 7 acres. People used to hit golf balls in there and that, and those people around here probably remember that. There was no roads there. We built the restaurant and we put the road in. They wanted it to come all the way down to Hickory. And we followed what they wanted, and then came D.L. Evans. D.L. Evans built their building. Ron Tromke built his building. It was what we created, and I think I've tried to explain this to the council. We've got a runway. They come from the back. They already do, and I'd love to show you. I'm there most days. I grow basil and I grow the oregano, and I'm the gardener, and I'm the one that cleans the front ditch for the city constantly. And I can tell you exactly what happens day after day after day. They come up that Hickory Road, they go past the back of Louis, and they're going to lose that little spot there with his sale. Then they go through the Blazer building, I still call it the Blazer building, and out. They got 3 ways. They can go Hickory. They don't do that very much. They come to the Louis thing, and then they go through. I need to explain about 8 years ago, we had one of our light towers go down. And the policemen were terrific. They found that was not a customer of ours. Those people the person had parked there, knocked over the tower, $10,000 light tower. Just 6 months ago, we had another light tower go down. Again, they were not in Louis. So the way this thing is, and it's, anyway, they've got complete access to our back, and sometimes a little kid's gonna come off there and get hit, I'm afraid. I would love you to come and just see what happens. I can show you in a half hour what happens. It's not, this building is not going to affect that at all, obviously. It's already happened. So you might as well understand that. They're coming out of, instead of going to Hickory into the stoplight, they're coming through there. Who complains about the speed bumps? You know why we had to put those speed bumps in? Because they were coming so fast up that road. We did it. So we're the culprits that built the speed bumps to slow things down, and we won't put them any lower. They're going to stay high. We're doing it, trying to be safety, trying to be good citizens. We're not trying to do anything that hurts anybody. The damage is already there, I can tell you, with this coming through. And some of them way too fast. And they're not headed to Louis, they're headed down the street. And I'll guarantee you, the Ewing family is not going to let that continue, I'll bet you. And you know that, who owns that property next. And the idea was good in the beginning, in 2000. Let's have a road so they can go down and avoid getting on Fairview. And I remember exactly, that's what that was for. So we're going to have a back road to catch these buildings behind. My friends, it's not working. And I'm just there, a gardener, trying to help a little bit, and I'm watching. I'm old, but I'm still aware. I have poor hearing, but good eyes. And so that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any
Do
questions?
you have any questions for me?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
while he's here, Louis, from a parking perspective, you know, you're busy. You're a great restaurant. We love having you in this community. And there are busy times, but do you think there's still adequate parking? I mean, their parking study showed there's adequate parking. From your just visual perspective, still room for customers to park without having to really, I mean, maybe for convenience reasons they go out, but for parking, if people want to come to your restaurant, there's room to park. Is that your perspective?
Well, we have plenty of parking, you know, and we have a lot of overflow parking coming into our parking lot, which you guys are all aware of. But the danger I see is the cars coming through with no intention of looking for a spot. If they were going to come in and look for a spot, they're not going to be going 20, 25, 30 miles an hour. They're going to be looking. But if they're not intending to get a parking spot, I wish you'd just come down and I'll show you how fast they go through there. We need to put speed bumps along there now.
Well, Mr. Mayor, it's an intriguing invitation, but I'm just afraid that he would put us to work cleaning out the ditch. So.
Mr. Mayor, maybe give us some pasta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Blaine, did you have any additional? Blaine, did you have any additional comments? I guess this council want to hear ask the applicant to respond to what Mr. Neri and Sonia were discussing. I guess that would be the question based upon what was discussed earlier amongst Mr. Neri and Sonia about process to get a little bit more detail to consider it together.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, So your question to me is what then?
Mr. Mayor, would you like, or Sonia, what application would you suggest maybe delay this one until it could be brought forward? Preliminary plat?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think, sir, what the suggestion was either to council's willing to consider and address the comp plan amendment to then allow you to apply and then to bring forward your application for a preliminary plat with DA conditions that we could then develop as part of that plat. Because right now, if we craft a DA for a plat that's undefined, it's not going to have a lot of in it. It's going to have to be redone again anyway.
Right.
So Sonia alternatively suggested that we continue the entire matter, give you time to get your preliminary plat, go through the process, let that catch up to this, and then we would have that conversation when it's all in front of us. Because normally you get the use approved for that location, you then bring in a plat of what you'd like to do, P&Z Commission and the council, then if they agree with it, they'll make conditions, we'll create a development agreement. We're kind of missing that middle piece.
Well, I think what I suggested earlier would be, obviously, our preference is to bring the DA to the planning and zoning and ultimately the city council with the preliminary plat process. I guess I'm not quite understanding why we need to miss the zone change piece in this.
Mr. Members of Council, because the state code allows us to do a development agreement with a rezone. It doesn't allow us to do a development agreement with a preliminary plat. So because we don't have a plat, all the DA is going to have is standard conditions of the city and require it be re-amended when you bring the plat back. And it only comes to city council. It doesn't go to the planning and zoning commission. So without that piece, we're either going to create a development agreement that has to be done over, or we're going to have to wait till we bring your preliminary plat and then just do it all at once.
Okay, I guess through this effort, if that's indeed the case, then we would rather not continue this with the preliminary plat. We would like to see council support for the comp plan change. And then come back, if that's the only way to do it, would then be to come back with the development agreement, change of zone and preliminary plat. So we're not stretching this out too far, if you will.
I think, Sonia, that would be the normal course we would recommend, I think.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, Council, Mr. Neri, if we do that, would you suggest continuing the rezone application, or would they have to resubmit and pay new fees on the rezone application? And then a side note that the application file number is associated, there's only one number associated with both of these subject applications.
And Mr. Members of the council, it's certainly the council's preference, but certainly continuing the rezone application to allow the preliminary plat to catch up would save the additional expense of filing new fees again for the same thing, but they would still go back together.
You could just table it off calendar, couldn't you?
Correct.
Staff would prefer that option.
Council, based upon that?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Gordon.
so I don't know if that speeds it up at all, acting on the comp plan amendment by itself. And I didn't know you could have a comp plan designation of residential use with a zoning of light office, which is what we would have in the interim. Doing the comp plan now by itself doesn't accelerate really anything one way or the other, because the ultimate act would occur at that future hearing date where the rezone and the DA and the plat all come together. If you had the comp plan amendment with that, doing it now or doing it then I don't think changes the pace of any of it.
Can I address that? It's a little more than just the pace. Certainly, we all seen situations where there's zoning inconsistencies. That's what consistency zoning is all about, is bringing the zoning in conformance with the comp plan. The concern we have, of course, is the continued effort, if you will, going through the process, spending money and going forward in the development entitlement process without at least getting some indication that we have a comp plan designation that conforms to what we're trying to do here. So it's a little more than just timing.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Gordon.
I totally get that. We're always just trying to look out for the unintended consequences. So, the comp plan change might make sense only because your project is worthy of it. You approve a comp plan change and then a future rezone gets denied, and now you've changed this parcel to be high density residential in some future applicant. So that's why I think the concept would all go together, because up until now, there's not been a project worthy of a comp plan change, quite frankly, and you might have the only one that carries the day. So.
Council, what would you think about a 10-minute recess to allow staff to confer with the applicant and come up with the desired path forward together? So let's do it. Start with a 10-minute recess. So we will go ahead and come out of recess. And I'm going to ask staff or the applicant if they have anything that they'd like to report back on a path forward, a preferred path forward this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We had a good discussion with the applicant and the property owner and all that. They're suggesting one of two pathways, both of which are legally compliant, both of which myself and planning is comfortable with. One obviously is more consistent with our past, but if the council is comfortable moving forward, if you're supportive of this project, you can approve the comp plan amendment to move forward. That comes back through a resolution. You also can approve a development agreement with a rezone that ties the rezone to this concept that's in front of you, this application. So then and they can even limit it even more specifically by the number of units or by the number of parking that needs to be present. That can then tie any other future property owner. So if this property the deal falls through, these folks aren't the property owners anymore, aren't the developers, anybody else who wants to come and build would have to build the same thing, or they'd have to come back for DA modification. That would come back through ordinance, and the ordinance wouldn't go forward until the development agreement was signed. So you would have some level of assurance. It'd be a little bit like what we've done rarely, but on occasions, of essentially approving a bubble plan, where it's generalized concept of what they want to do without really building heights, elevations, renderings, and that kind of thing. Secondarily, if the council is still a little concerned, I mean, they can bring forward the preliminary plat, and as Councilmember Borton had suggested, in just holding these off until that catches up, and then that has to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission first, and then would come back to you. That's probably a 2 to 3 month delay potentially for that. But again, it would tie it up more tightly, because now you'd have really a plat application, not just a concept plan. But either one of those they could live with. They prefer the first one versus the second, but both of those would at least be better in their perspective than a denial. And they certainly can live with those limitations to the development agreement tied to the rezone.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may add to that, members of the council, there is currently a development agreement provision that's recommended by staff in the staff report, number 1A, that requires future development of this site to be generally consistent with the conceptual development plan and building elevations included in the staff report. And what that means to staff and the applicant is when a future development application comes in, we'll be looking at this concept plan to make sure that they don't have any additional buildable lots or units, dwelling units, shown on their application. If they do, it would not be deemed to be generally consistent with the concept plan that's approved and included in the development agreement. Same with the parking spaces. If there was fewer parking spaces shown, staff would require them to increase those to at least those that are shown on the concept plan. So that's the assurance you have that this property would develop as it's proposed. If you do not want it to develop with this many units or additional parking spaces, you can certainly make that part of your recommendation if you choose to go forward with the rezone tonight in the development agreement. Staff will stand for any questions you might have.
Thank you. Council, how would you like to proceed this evening, if at all?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I think started for conversation's sake. Generally, I like the concept plan. I think there's an opportunity, as we kind of discussed earlier, to maybe repurpose that common lot to some additional parking. Overall, I think I quoted planning and zoning last time saying this is I think the second best option we would get outside of commercial. And I think almost 20 years is enough time to say, let's be open to something else. Tonight, I think I am generally supportive of the comp plan amendment. I'm not quite sure that I'm there on granting a rezone without a plat. And just for the sake of conversation, I think you guys are honest brokers. I believe you're coming to tell us this is the plan, this is what you're going to do. As council, we don't necessarily look at it as people. I like to look at it more as process, and I always struggle with a rezone without a plat before me. I appreciate, we can tie the concept plan in the DA. I'm also very sympathetic to how the plat's going to lay out with elevations, particularly on the piece that faces the neighbors. And so I struggle with that particular piece. I think it's an appropriate use of land. I think with a couple of small tweaks, we can address at least what I think are some of my concerns about putting usable parking closer to where the residents live to prevent those unintended consequences of people parking on Hickory or having it flow out into the neighborhood. So that's kind of where I'm sitting tonight. Happy to have a conversation, happy to see where the rest of the body is.
Thank you. Anybody else like to add in, weigh in? Or motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borton.
for the reasons stated earlier, I'd prefer to continue all of it. I think I wouldn't think that a comp plan amendment to medium-high residential here would be appropriate by itself, and that's kind of what we'd be doing if we did it separate. So I think bumping them all makes the most sense. Otherwise, you're saying that this property should be medium-high residential no matter what. And I don't know if that's what we're saying.
Mr. Mayor. Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, this is a project that I think is worth consideration. And to Councilman Borton's point, if it was a different project, we might feel differently. So I think it's a matter of then how do we move forward? As Councilman Kavanagh pointed out, there might be some tweaks that we'd like to see in this as it relates to parking, maybe where the housing sits, so on and so forth. So I really don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this. And I think if we just bring back all three, let that preliminary plat catch up, and then we can make a full decision based on all the information and the facts available and make it the right decision for this particular project with all the other things involved. So. Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Burnt.
I'm in agreement with that. As you all know, and I've been fairly consistent over the years, it's really difficult for me to, change a zoning designation from commercial to residential. For me, it has to meet a high bar. I'm not sold on that quite yet, but at the same time, would like to see the whole project put together with the plat and everything in front of us to see what that looks like. I don't think we've seen that yet, obviously, and so I would be in favor of continuance.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
I agree with Councilman Borton. The comprehensive plan goes through really long and involved and intense review with feedback from our public and staff and Planning and Zoning Commission, and we take it really seriously when there's a request to change it, whether it's 2 acres or 20 acres. And so I'm not in favor of changing it without, just as was suggested, changing the plan amendment and without making, continuing the rezone request. And I understand the applicant's desire to get a commitment from us on that comp plan change before they invest further in the engineering costs to create the preliminary plat, but it's also a big ask of us to modify the flume when that's gone through such an involved process to get to those decisions to begin with. So that's my.
So with that, council, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
Um, did we have a discussion with the applicant about time frame? Take for them to have their plat prepared?
Mr. Mayor? Would that be until the preliminary plat catches up? I mean, that'd be just to a time certain when the preliminary plat would be ready for.
Is that acceptable, Mr. Neri, for a legal definition of a to continue until date?
So, Mr. Members of the council, yeah, the hard part is we don't know when it'll go to the Planning and Zoning Commission and when they'll make a decision. So they'll all have to be renoticed. So it may be, this may be the rare circumstance to just continue the matter based on that as your motion, that you want all of these to be heard together, and then they'll have to be renoticed. And so they're going to have to renotice, well, they'll notice the preliminary plat for planning, zoning, and council, and we will renotice the application for the comp plan amendment and the rezone at the same time.
So not to a date certain at this point in time.
I don't think it would be wise to do that. I think you can leave it open and just require that it be renoticed, all three of them be renoticed for council.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to motion.
Councilman Pearl.
I move that we continue Woodcrest Townhomes H202010015 until such a time as the comprehensive plan flume amendment, rezone, and a preliminary plat can be presented together with an application. And the hearings for the comprehensive plan flume amendment and the rezone will be renoticed.
Second the motion.
I have a motion, a second. Is there a discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
question, I guess maybe for legal staff, if there are changes that council wants to see, should we be articulating that now? So,
Are they different than the comments that have already been indicated in tonight's conversation?
No, Mr. Mayor, they haven't. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't want us to, if we're surprised, to then say, well, I expected some of these things. So I'm good.
Mr. Mayor, if I may clarify, staff is not entirely sure what changes you're asking for, and I'm not sure if the applicant is either. So if you have changes that you want to the concept plan, now would be a good time to state those, please. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pearl.
I know for myself, I'd like to see some additional parking in one of the common areas. However, that needs to be designed in the concept plan, wherever that can be fit. But I'm still not convinced. The applicant indicated in his testimony that they would make that consideration, that they feel like there's room on the property to do that. So I would like to see that. I don't see a downside in that, considering that they're not required to have any open space to begin with. Not that I don't think they should, but that would be my preference. I can't state a specific number because, that's, I should do that.
Is it relocation of or more in that location?
Sorry?
Is it relocation of where it is on the current to that location, or do you want more than what is currently there and have it added to that area?
I would like more total. It doesn't matter to me if they move it around and redesign as far as, so there's 5 here on the east side and 4 on the north side. If they want to add more to those areas, that's fine. If they want to add more in this other south corner, that's fine too. I don't have a specific location in mind. I just want some additional spaces that are on the property itself, especially if they're intending to remove themselves from the reciprocal agreement.
I think that was the only thing that I heard council really discuss was the parking of significance in direction. I didn't hear anything about relocation of buildings personally. Speak up if that's the council's desired direction.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Again, one council member, I think I had some concerns about height and location of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buildings that really are going to face up against the existing residence. I think that that'll be captured somewhat in the plat. That's obviously a piece that I'm going to be honing in on.
Anything else? That all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The item is agreed to, and the item is continued.
Mr. Mayor, who was the second on that? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing for City of Meridian's intent to convey to the Ada County Highway District approximately 23,816 square feet of real property in Discovery Park. Open this public hearing with staff comments.
Mr. Mayor, I can probably start this off for Mayor and Council. We have a standard agreement with the Highway District when there are needs for right-of-way improvements to transfer that property to them at no cost based on our prior agreements. I think Steve has a more specific detail on why it's necessary for this particular project.
Sure. I'm not sure I'm the applicant, but I'm as close as you have on something like this. The requirement is for the driveway that will serve Apex subdivision to our west primarily to align with Lavender Heights on the north. And this is the location. We've anticipated it. That northwest corner of the park was left undeveloped in our first phase to accommodate a future street in this location. So like Mr. Neri just said, this would be the standard request under our current agreement with ACHD. And we're supportive from our perspective, and I'll stand for any questions.
And Mr. Mayor, council members, just, John Wardle is on the line as well if you had questions of them specifically.
He is on the line, yes.
Council, any questions? Okay. Did we have anyone sign up to provide testimony on this item?
Mr. Mayor, only Mr. Wardle.
Okay. Mr. Wardle, would you like to provide testimony on this item?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Can now, yes.
John Wardle, 2929 West Navigator, Meridian, Idaho 83642. And I represent Brighton, and we have the project that we're developing to the west of Discovery Park, which is referenced as Apex, but also known as Pinnacle. And Mr. Sidaway was accurate and did convey what the ask is for tonight. The Lavender Heights to the north established the location of the collector road, and the alignment on the south is just going through the corner of Discovery Park and connecting into our development. That collector road is being built completely by Brighton through the development. And so it's really just improvements over the top of the right-of-way to align with Lavender Heights. If you had any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those tonight.
Council, any questions? No questions. This is a public hearing. Is anyone that'd like to provide testimony on this item? If so, please come forward now. Or if you're online, you can unmute you can raise your hand feature. Seeing no one wishing to provide testimony, council, do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I move that we close the public hearing for City of Meridian's intent to convey to the Ada County Highway District approximately 23,816 square feet of real property at Discovery Park, located off East Lake Hazel Road and adjacent to the proposed Apex subdivision.
Second the motion.
I have a motion second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Public hearing is closed.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
do we take any action on this?
Yeah, so there's nothing further at this point in time. So with that, we will move on to ordinances. Number 5 is ordinance number 21-1938. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance authorizing the conveyance of certain city-owned real property to the Ada County Highway District for right-of-way purposes, consisting of approximately 0.547 acres located at Discovery Park, 2121 East Lake Hazel Road, adjacent to the proposed Apex subdivision, approximately 1,320 feet to the east of South Locust Grove Road in Ada County, authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute and attest on behalf of the city of Meridian the deed and other documents necessary to complete the transaction, providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
Thank you, council. You've heard this item read by title. Is there anybody that would like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1938 with the suspension of rules.
Second the motion.
I have a motion second to approve the ordinance under suspension of the rules. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the ordinance is agreed to. Next item is ordinance number 21-1943. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance repealing Title VII, Chapter 5, Meridian City Code regarding golf carts and providing an effective date.
Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anyone who would like it read in its entirety? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
move that we approve ordinance number 21-1943.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 21-1943. Is there a discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the ordinance is agreed to. Next item is ordinance number 21-1944. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance of the City of Meridian, Idaho, amending ordinance 20-1892, the appropriation of ordinance for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2020 and ending September 30th, 2021, fiscal year 21, appropriating monies that are to be allocated by the City of Meridian, Idaho in the sum of negative $18,529,448 for a total fiscal budget of $133,440,143 to provide for a waiver of the second and third readings pursuant to Idaho Code Section 5902 and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1944, which is amending ordinance number 201892 with a suspension of rules.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 21-1944. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The ordinance is agreed to. Next item up is ordinance number 21-1945. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance pursuant to Idaho Code 50-1002 and 50-1003, providing for a title and findings, providing for the adoption of a budget and the appropriation of $185,198,966 to defray the necessary expenditures and liabilities of the City of Meridian in accordance with the object and purposes and in certain amounts herein specified for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2021 and ending September 30th, 2022, to levy all such appropriate taxes and levies as authorized by law upon taxable property, and to collect all revenue, to provide for a waiver of the second and third readings pursuant to Idaho Code Section 5902, and providing for an effective date and filing of a certified copy of this ordinance with the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1945 with the suspension of rules.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 21-1945 under suspension of the rules. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Nay.
4 ayes, 1 nay. Item is agreed to. Next item is ordinance number 21-1946. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ordinance This is an ordinance related to H 2020-0047 Prescott Ridge for annexation of a parcel situated in a portion of the west one half of the northeast one quarter and a portion of the west one half of section 28, Township 4 North, Range 1 West, Ada County, Idaho, and being more particularly described in Attachment A, and annexing certain lands and territories situated in Ada County, Idaho, and adjacent contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Meridian as requested by the city of Meridian. Establishing, determining the land use zoning classification of 128.21 acres of land from RUT to R8, medium density residential, 99.53 acres, R15, medium high density residential, 8.82 acres, and CG, general retail and service commercial, 19.85 acre zoning districts in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing for a summary of the ordinance and providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pearl.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1946 with the suspension of rules.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 21-1946 under suspension of the rules. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the ordinance is agreed to. Next item up is item 10, which is ordinance number 21-1947. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're almost there. This is an ordinance related to H 2021-0035 TM Creek Apartments Phase 3 for rezone of a part of the northwest one quarter of Section 14, Township 3 North, Range 1 West, Boise Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. Establishing and determining the land use zoning classification of 5.58 acres of land for the TNC Traditional Neighborhood Center zoning district to the CG General Retail and Service Commercial zoning district in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing an effective date.
Thank you, council. You've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that would like it read in its entirety? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pearl.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1947.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 21-1947. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the ordinance is agreed to. Item 11, ordinance number 21-1948. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance related to H 2021-0025, the 10 Meridian for annexation of the northeast one quarter of the northeast one quarter of Section 15, Township 3 North, Range 1 West, Boise Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, as described in Attachment A, and annexing certain lands and territories situated in Ada County, Idaho, and adjacent contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Meridian, as requested by the city of Meridian. Establishing and determining the land use zoning classification of 40.3 acres, more or less, of land from RUT to CC Community Business District, 27.25 acres, and R40 High Density Residential, 13.04 acres zoning districts in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing for a summary of the ordinance and providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
Thank you, council. You've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pearl.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1948 with the suspension.
Second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 21-1948 under suspension of the rules. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, then the ordinance is agreed to. Council, anything under future meeting topics? Or a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burt.
move that we adjourn.
Second the motion.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.
Good night, everybody.